Okay, so we will begin this morning with a roll editing. We're shifting gears a bit, and this whole morning is really taken up with analysis and tools for analysis and results from analysis of rolls. And we have a lot of Welte rolls in particular this morning. And then, just as a little signposting for the afternoon, we have music, lots of music. In particular, a lot of performing and performers who are dealing with performance practice, and then of course the concert this evening. So looks to be a great day. So I'm going to start with Hermann Gottschewski, who is visiting us from Japan, but who hails from Germany and has done wonderful work on Welte rolls. We had discussions and heard his research at the last Global Roll meeting. And he found really interesting things with multiple editions of, multiple versions, multiple copies, I should say, of the same Welte roll. And he's continuing this research and showing us his latest findings today. So very excited to have him with us here today, just as he gets ready to depart tonight, too, because he has to leave. So if you have questions for him, grab him today while you can. So thanks, Hermann. Yep.
So thank you for your introduction and good morning, everyone. I hope you slept well and you will not sleep during my presentation. I am really glad to be on this conference and to talk about my ongoing project on changes that were made to already published Welte Mignon rolls, or in other words, differences between rolls of the same recording that were punched at different times or places. My thanks go to all those who prepared this conference and contributed to its perfect organization. I made a small change in my presentation title. Due to limited time, I will skip the pedaling and just focus on dynamics today. 2 years ago in Bern, I spoke about 3 different copies of the Welte Mignon roll number 548, that is Raoul Pugnot, playing Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 15, number 2. I could show that the copies were different, not only by chance. Obviously, someone had intentionally changed the expression. So the question arose as to whether this was an isolated case or not, and why these changes happened, and what they mean for a historical and aesthetical evaluation of the rolls. That was the starting question of my present research project. Meanwhile, I got funding from the JSPS, who also paid for my travel to Australia for this conference. One of the first problems I tried to solve was to develop methods to find significant differences between rolls using raw MIDI files as they are provided by Supra. I learned that there is a better homepage now, but I couldn't use that. So raw MIDI files are files that treat every single hole in a piano roll as a MIDI event. Finding significant differences means to distinguish between small differences resulting from copying and changes that occurred by intention of the editor. Furthermore, intentional changes may happen for technical reasons or to change or improve the musical effect, and only the latter are the ones that I address in my project. I call them musically significant changes. You can see, for example, that the 2 copies of Welte Mignon roll number 662 provided by Supra are significantly different in their musical effect because at some time between 1918 and 1924, an editor made the chords asynchronous and added accents to make the melody more clearly audible. The impression of the music changed a lot, as the computer emulations at Supra prove. '18 version. 1924 version. A systematic investigation of all 39 pairs of rolls provided by Supra brought about that at least 2/3 of them contained musically significant changes. Furthermore, it could be shown that such kind of changes were made at almost every time of the production period of the rolls. Most frequently, the dynamics were edited. Less frequently, the pedaling, or the timing or length of notes, and sometimes tones were added, changed, or deleted. The invention of asynchronicity, as shown in the previous example, is a rare case, however, although it's extremely interesting. Last month, I gave a presentation about these findings at Guildford, and you can see a live recording of my presentation by accessing the URL or the QR code shown on the screen. In my presentation today, I will focus on two aspects. The first is to discuss a method for an evaluation of encoding changes in dynamics. The second is to re-evaluate the already mentioned Mignon recording. So let's go to the first topic. One fundamental problem of evaluating changes in the encoding of dynamics is that a single code, say for example a crescendo forte, which means a slow crescendo, does not cause the same effect in all circumstances. For example, in pianissimo, it causes a gradual increase in dynamics, and in forte, it results in holding the present dynamical level. A long crescendo forte will finally converge to a certain level, which is called Welte laut by the Supra programmers, but no technical manual specifies that level, although it can be adjusted. In consequence, the meaning of a certain code can depend on the setting of the instrument which is used for reproduction. So my idea is that rolls with expression lines provide the possibility of a historical objectivation of that problem. I changed the colors to make the lines more clearly visible. Pianissimo is outside and fortissimo is in the middle of the graph. As earlier researchers such as Hans Schmitz have pointed out, the expression lines show quite precisely how the two expression bellows moved. Let's listen to this example in the Supra emulation. So, expression lines are real historical examples of the movements of the expression bellows. If we could compare roll editions based on rolls with expression lines only, we had a historical objective view of the matter. Unfortunately, expression lines were used in the late production period only. So my idea was to emulate expression lines by software. If the emulation proves to be very similar to existing expression lines, emulated expression lines can be used for the evaluation of rolls that have no expression lines. In this sense, I use the term historically objectified evaluation. It is important to know that the crescendos and diminuendos of Welte instruments are by no way linear processes. For example, the curves of the crescendo piano, which means slow diminuendo, look like an exponential decay. Consequently, the time from fortissimo to mezzo forte is much shorter than that from mezzo forte to pianissimo. Also, the other functions like crescendo forte, forzando forte, and so on have their specific forms. If the curves are not emulated correctly, errors can add up over time and result in completely wrong dynamics. as can be observed in some of the emulations in Supra. I'll give you an example of my emulation. This is one example of an original expression line as written on a roll punched in 1923. To make it simple, I have shown only the left half of the keyboard and the left half of the roll. At the bottom of the roll, you can see the three categories of tracks that influence the movement of the expression bellows: mezzo forte on and mezzo forte off, slow crescendo and slow diminuendo, and fast crescendo and fast diminuendo. Here is only fast crescendo and no fast diminuendo in this place. Please notice that the original expression line is not exactly at the place where it should be. For instance, the fast crescendo caused by these forzando forte holes begins a few millimeters too early in the expression lines. Perhaps there was a technical reason that the lines could not be written exactly above the holes in the sliding block. For this presentation, I'll move the holes so that they fit exactly to the lines. After the movement, also the slow diminuendos and crescendos fit exactly to the expression line. And this is my emulation, which uses the data of the raw MIDI files. It's a work in progress, but I think it looks already quite similar, although I have not yet emulated the process of transition between different functions. But the similarity between the two curves shows sufficiently that it is possible to emulate expression lines from the information of raw MIDI files only. Now let us look at the bottom part of an earlier roll. There are 4 missing holes. There are 4 missing holes. That means these holes were added by an editor between 1920 and 1923. If we now emulate the earlier roll copy, it is the red line, we see what the expression line would have looked like if it had been written onto the earlier roll. So the difference between the red and the blue line shows how the movement of the expression bellow is affected by the editor's changes. Next, let us see which tones are really affected by these changes. We see that the first forzando forte affects almost all tones of the tremolo in the left hand, but the difference is greatest at the beginning and then gradually disappears. The other change only makes a single note louder, since the next one is mezzo forte in both versions. That means that the crescendo and diminuendo that were also added in the later roll have no effect on any note. I guess that the editor added the 2 holes to make the next tone also louder, but at least in the setting that was used for creating the expression lines, he failed. It might work in another setting if the reproduction piano is regulated differently from that which was used to write the expression lines. Since the Supra emulation is much different from what we see here, it can't be used to make these effects audible. I hope in future I will be able to do my own audio simulations. Unfortunately, it turned out that the expression lines, although they reflect how the expression bellows really worked in a historical environment, are not in accordance with what the test roll demands. For example, if we go back to the picture of the slow diminuendos, we see that the length of the process from mezzo forte to pianissimo is very different from roll to roll, much more than the differences of paper speed could explain. And even in the same roll, sometimes the length is much different in the right and left, which should not happen. So, strangely enough, It is a historical fact that the instruments which were used for writing the expression lines were not properly regulated. It is possible, however, to normalize the emulation by modifying the parameters so that they meet the requirement of the test roll, or in other words, to show how the expression lines would have looked like if the instrument had been regulated using the test roll before writing the expression lines to the historical roll. For normalized emulations, I use a default setting that is derived from several historical objectified emulations and works in accordance with the test roll. Now, I have used such a normalized emulation to re-evaluate the different copies of Pugnot's Chopin roll number 548. At my presentation in Bern, I had 3 different versions, but meanwhile I could find at least 6 stages of this roll between which musical significant changes occurred. From the first to the 5th version, the dynamics became more and more elaborated. From the 5th to the 6th versions, the dynamics remained almost untouched, but the pedaling was significantly changed. Since I don't have full access to the 4th version, to the data of the 4th version, I have used the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 6th stage as significantly different versions for this presentation. The 6th version is, of course, identical in dynamics with the 5th version. By the way, in all rows that I have analyzed so far, the most frequent change was to make certain notes louder than before. The opposite is rather seldom. So it happens that if we make normalized emulations of the rolls, the average position of the expression bellows becomes higher and higher from version to version. This can also be observed in the case of this roll. You can see in the graph that the greatest increase is between the first 2 versions. Indeed, the most changes occurred between these two rolls. That means before 1909, that means before 1909, because the second version is about 1909 and the first version is even earlier. And there we find changes in almost every bar, more than 140 changes throughout the roll. This slide shows the emulation of the expression lines for the whole piece. The red curve is the first version, which was punched before 1909. The blue curve is the second version from Supra, which was punched around 1909. By the way, when we read expression lines from left to right, they are easier to understand if we invert the expression lines of the right hand. So, in both hands, pianissimo is at the bottom and fortissimo at the top. Now you can see in the picture that virtually no part of the piece remained unchanged, and that in most cases the blue line is on top of the red line. That means the piece became louder. The next piece shows the changes that were made between 1909 and 1912. And this slide are the changes that were made between 1915 and 1923. And now I will show you how much it changed from the earliest to the last version I have found up to date. It seems that the part in the temporal middle of the piece was changed the most. Here, in the earliest roll, the dynamical level remains beyond piano in both hands, but in the latest roll, many tones are louder than mezzo forte. Let us look at the music and at all 4 versions together. At the bottom, the red curve is the earliest version, orange is the second, green the third, and the thin black line the last version. We listen to real live performances of these rolls. The first is the earliest roll, which I have recorded in the house of Dennis Hall at London, who possesses this earlier roll. The red curve. And now listen to what I have recorded 30 years ago in the Augustiner Museum in Freiburg, which was the last version, so the thin black line. Although the recording conditions were very different, the settings of the instrument were different, the increase in loudness is easily perceivable, and it's not because of the instruments, but because of the change in coding. By the way, if we compare these recordings with the 1903 acoustic recording, it seems that the later versions of the roll are closer to Pugnau's playing than the earliest one. If this is true, the big remaining question is why the earliest version of the roll contains so little of the original dynamics. Was the dynamical level not properly recorded? Or was the process of encoding so difficult that it took years to have all recorded data reflected in the roll? I think my time has come to an end, and I will therefore leave the detailed analysis of the changes in this roll to a future presentation. Finally, I want to highlight the following 3 points. First, different rolls of the same recording can be very different in dynamics. Second, it seems that very early rolls were rather less elaborated in expression, not to say primitive. Third, for future research, I need more scanned rolls of data of rolls, preferably rolls with punching date or those that can be approximately dated. Whoever can help, please help me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Wow, this is so interesting for uncovering, unlocking the mystery of Welte expression. This has always been a topic. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a niche topic, but it's with so much so much discussion and so many years of speculation has gone into trying to figure out the mysteries of Welte expression. And in this case, you're trying to you're using available data to some extent to call into question some of the presumptions, I think, that have been present for years with regards to Welte expression. But also, it's so there's so many ways in which I think this is so interesting and so significant. Also, the multiple copies of the same roles, again, something so important, and you testify how important that is. So yeah, I think it's fantastic. I should just add, just before I take questions, that some of what you're doing is actually going to be addressed in our new site that I'm saying we should be using now instead of the super site. But we should credit also Craig Sapp as the creator of the super site, and Peter Broadwell here, who's the creator of the new super site, essentially. So it's very much a work in progress, but it's wonderful to see it being utilized. So, any questions here? Yeah, Peter, of course. Can you hear? Is this working? It's not, right? Yeah. It is. I think it's right into it.
jumping right into it. It's not so much a question, it's more saying everything that I have heard today is very true. Peter, Hermann and I are very similar in what we do. That is emulating Welte up to the mouth, right? Whoa. Okay, I'll repeat what I said. Hermann and I travel very similar paths. We actually both stare at rolls. We stare at so many of these Welte rolls from the early days. I have found incredible differences, and I know that Hermann has too. For example, having a fast decrescendo following before the note is intended to be accented. Certainly it's the early rolls that have so many problems, and I think part of the problem or reason was the desire for Welte to get these rolls out on the market. And subsequently later editions, particularly when they went to the T98, the green, I saw numerous edits on rolls held at the California University. So all I can say is what I've seen today from Hermann is exactly what I would agree with. It's a marvellous presentation, Hermann. You're doing great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Marcel.
Thank you. Is it possible to derive the pattern of the expression holes from the expression line?
I think so. You can almost see it. I found it interesting, for example, if you have a quick, fast crescendo, and during the fast crescendo, the slow crescendo moves to a slow diminuendo, you see it in the line. And so you can almost derive any hole from the line if you know how to read it. Although there are a few cases where holes will have no effect. So you cannot see the mezzo forte hole if the dynamics doesn't go to mezzo forte and so on. And there are other cases, if you are in fortissimo, you don't see the crescendo and so, yeah.
So that could be a way to find the mystery of the Welte, how they did it in the old days, maybe.
I guess, I don't know, but I guess that these expression lines were not only created for customers. Now the expression lines we have are for customers, but that they had something like that from the earliest day in their company, and they were used it by editing the rolls, because if you don't have something like that, it must be very difficult to edit a roll.
Yeah, I think. Thank you.
I am, of course, interested in that example of the Pugno, where the editor has actually created asynchrony. And you said it was rare, but how rare? Does this happen in other cases as well, where the editor puts in what I would consider old-fashioned expression?
Yeah. This was not Pugno, but Hofmann.
The case. Sorry.
Yeah, but I found 3 or 4 cases, but no other case where it's so put to so systematically as in the Hofmann roll. But I looked at these 39 pairs, and I found 3 or 4 rolls where such a change occurs at any point.
Because it's just that thing of people, saying, "Oh, the rolls are edited," and then this is not actually how they played. So I'm just interested in this.
This possibility is, in any case, it's present, but all of you know that the acoustics recordings have also much of this displacement. And I found even rolls where the timing of the tones is added, making a displacement without changing the dynamics, without adding an accent. So it sounded better if the melody note comes a bit later, although there is no accent. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very interesting example, really interesting case, and
I mean, I don't want to go this far, but does it to some extent call into question, the accuracy of Welte rolls in some ways? I mean, that does seem to be one of the critiques that we've been for years trying to allay, say that they are reliable, they are very useful data, but to see this much editorialization and to see it evolving iteratively almost as they are growing their techniques, what do you think about that in terms of fidelity to the original recording?
First, we have to see there is no 100% fidelity, and if a pianist plays like this, so the editor has the choice to make all tones the same loudness or to make the displacement and to have the melody played as by the pianist. So both versions, the delayed version is has fidelity in terms of dynamics, and the other has fidelity in terms of timing, and you cannot have both, and so the editor has a choice. And it seems that the later editor took another choice than the earlier editor. And I think the Welte Mignon cannot reproduce everything what a pianist makes. And it's the profession of the editor to make a version that sounds convincing. Yeah. And so these additions are not to make fidelity on or off, but it's the editor in this moment thought that it's the best way to reproduce the pianist, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, even if he could conceive of that, Neil, that shows that it was in the stylisms of the day. Yeah, so clearly it was a present, oral phenomenon. Also, I wonder with Hofmann, he was sort of a modernist. He would be probably playing cleaner very often and less hand dislocation. And maybe the editors, these old-fashioned Welte editors, were, missing what should be. Yeah, and then on the other hand, we know Rachmaninoff actually was complaining that they did the opposite to him. They made him play straighter on his chords to Ampico, and he was upset about this. Any questions further? Yes, so lots of questions. Okay, Craig.
Related to the hand dislocation example, I don't think it's necessarily that the German one was later, because it could be that the German one was set like in 1910 or whenever it was recorded, and then when it went to America, they edited it to make it even. And then they subsequently made us a copy in Germany of the earlier version.
I have tested this, so that was my question also. I found in Bern there is a German roll of 1912, and it has no dislocation.
Hermann, for the last 2 years, we are developing, making new rolls for Welte, and what you just showed on the piano, with striking one chord with one note louder than the other. If you have MIDI data, then it comes from a computer, and there is no difference between the timing of a loud note or a soft note. And with a piano roll, when a hole comes to the checker bar, then the key must be striked, and when the note is louder, it goes quicker. So if you have a chord on a Welte with soft notes first and then a fortissimo, and after that, short after that, the louder note, then they strike together, audible together, and it is a louder note. So it seems impossible, but there is a kind of nuance made to if you do it like that.
I think if you have very accurate punching, it may be possible what you say, but actually they created the master to take copies of it, and the punching is not that accurate. And so if you have a very small delay which is really not audible but makes the difference, it might be possible, but it might not work on any copy. And so in the cases I have seen so far, Welte makes a bigger difference, which is audible as a delay.
Hermann, number one, thank you for the presentation. I love what you're doing. We have access actually to many scans of 548. If you want to have many of them, you can get them. And I think what I told you yesterday, that the Welte system had expression levers from the beginning. Right from the beginning, they offered that instrument. It might be possible to find very early rolls even. So I will check what we have and send you all the data we have.
That's the kind of thing I want to profit from this conference. Thank you so much.
Great. Quick comment?
Yeah, so related to your comments, in the Yamaha disc clavier, there's like a interactive mode and a non-interactive mode, and the non-interactive mode is half a second to compensate for all of those different timings of slow and fast notes. So at least on disc claviers, there's compensation. So yeah, I can't imagine exactly how they do that with built-in piano roll recording in general, or if they compensate at all.
I'm going to include another question I missed here. Sorry.
Thanks, Hermann. That was a great presentation. I've got a lot of questions that I want to ask you, but I'll try and keep it short. I'm wondering whether because you talked about the normalization of expression marks between the left hand and right hand, I'm wondering whether, is this something that we want? And the second question, because of what you said about the voicing of chords of left hand and right hand being different. And the second question is, with all these additions of rolls, and do you see a similar pattern in the effect that they were trying to achieve? I know they sound different, but is there a gist of how the pianist played behind what we can see of the similarities that editors were trying to achieve in trying to portray how the pianist sounds?
Yeah, so to the last question, I think that's a question I have to deal in future. So I have to analyze more cases in detail. But the most frequent change, as I have said, is that they made certain notes louder. And mostly in passages they are in piano or pianissimo. So if the dynamics is above the mezzo forte level, you have fewer changes. And so I think they listened to the recording and thought some note should be is a bit too soft. And it's a kind of psychological effect. And so someone made this note louder, and because this note became louder, the note before sounds too soft, and the next editor makes a note before louder, and the next editor makes the other note again louder. We have a number of cases where you can see, for example, here in the right hand, you see that the red curve is at the bottom and the orange curve is above that, and green curve is above that, and the black curve is above that. So you see from editor to editor, it becomes louder and louder, and so this tone was not loud enough. In fact, this tone is played very loud in the acoustical recording. Yeah. What was your other question?
We might move on here. This is good. We can have more time at the break. Thank you so much, Hermann. Obviously a very engaging and interesting topic. Love to hear the next version with the multiple copies, even more copies of the Pugno. That'd be great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Another analysis topic here. Wonderful, detailed. I find that really interesting, the idea. There seems to be almost a way to grapple with what we're hearing in a performance, if I can extrapolate, Niels. And this is one of the essential problems we've faced in performance analysis, is just how to describe performances, how to talk about performances. They are inevitably elusive in this way, and that's one of the reasons why you might say people are easily, they can devalue roles and performance recordings and performance analysis as well. So this is all contributing, I think, to this question, how do we grapple with performances, how do we get underneath what they contain. So in this case, we have another example, a little more direct. Craig Sapp is at Stanford and was a creator of the supersite that we've seen multiple people use right now. He's now doing other related work, but and Akiko has been working in performance analysis as well in Japan for years, has visited us and spent quite a bit of time at Stanford as well. So they are giving us some findings on their research with Josef Hofmann roles. So wonderful to have them both here. Yeah.
You can hold this if you want to talk. So we're going to present one role in specific of Josef Hofmann and look at different places where he was clearly editing the music, and maybe discuss reasons why for doing that. So one interesting thing about Josef Hofmann is he was both a very good, world-class pianist, but he was also very interested in technology. So here's a picture of him in his studio working on probably his dynamics recording, direct from the performer. And so this is from a International Piano Quarterly in 1927, which was the same year that he was granted a patent for a dynamic recorder. So here's just some figures from the recorder, and I have a link at the bottom. So I can give you the link to the website, or the slides are online. I can give you a link to it later. So one thing we're not going to talk about it directly, but dynamics are basically fantasy that's not related to the pianist. So Hofmann was very interested in having the pianist control the dynamic control. So here's how it typically works, is you have an expressionist who's usually been trained and can figure out somehow how to do this. Basically has two volume controls for the volume of the left and right half of the piano. And then later on you have snake bites, which are added separately, but this would be an earlier thing before snake bites, but this was also used during the snake bite development. So with this volume control, you can get two volumes for left and right, and snake bites basically gives you maybe up to 4 kind of volumes for the piano by carefully adjusting the timings. So Hofmann was also interested in, he did many patents on, this is for shock absorbers for cars or planes, and he also did patents on windshield wipers, for example. So he was very interested in cars and also very interested in piano and piano technology. So that's kind of the background of what his interests are. And he was probably the first renowned pianist to be recorded by Thomas Edison. So slightly before, who was it? Hans von Bülow?
No, Grunfeld.
Grunfeld? Yeah, so Grunfeld recorded for Edison about 6 months later. And then he was so good, he was like the only private student of Anton Rubinstein when he was 16. And also he did an initial tour of America when he was 11, but he got kicked out for, I have a problem with my keyboard, so it sometimes jumps forward. So let me go back here. But he was kicked out because he was too young, but he came back to America when he was about 18. And he was also the first head of piano department at Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, and later became director for 11 years. So he was always very interested in these sorts of technology and music. So these are the recordings that we're going to be using. So we have a roll recording of Hofmann and Paderewski, and an audio recording of Hofmann and Paderewski. And we also, for comparison, we also have Harold Bauer, who's an English pianist who studied with Paderewski, and Augusta Kotlau, who's an American who studied with Busoni when she was in Europe. So we're specifically looking at a roll of Chopin's Waltz in 8 flat major, opus 42. So just for reference, here's the phrasing structure of the piece. So it's mostly 16-bar phrases, and you can see the repetition patterns of the music. So we won't play the whole thing, but you can refer to it later if you want to look in more detail. So the first thing we'll do is look at the opening. So I'll play, if my audio is set up, I'll have the Hofmann Duo Art 1921 recording rendered by Peter. Okay. Volume there. Yeah, I'll play it a little louder.
Try it again. Should be much louder now.
And then here's the audio recording from 1935, April. Maybe. So I know what's going on here, but it'd be hard for me to figure it out. So one thing, just a little definition of, I'm using IOI, which means inter-onset interval, which is just the time between onsets. So I'm not looking at duration, but this time between the starts of notes. So this is used often in cognitive psychology. So here's looking at the opening 16-bar phrase of different pianists. So if you look at these, one of them does not look like the other. So we see Hofmann, the duo art, it's exactly even spacing of all the melody notes. So all the other pianists have a little bit of variation. Kotlau has like a two-note rubato, which is fairly noticeable in the plot. And Bauer and Paderewski are fairly flat, but they do have like a little slowdown at the 8-bar phrase boundary. So you wonder about this this straight spot, and like there's no way a pianist could play that precisely, even if they were like the best in the world. And you see Paderewski, who's a very well-renowned poet, our pianist, he has a fairly flat, but not exactly flat. So now it's misbehaving. Where at it? So here it's expanding out to 32 bars. And you see there is some boundary difference of like one punch basically in the middle of Hofmann, and then it's perhaps he got a little bored with doing it evenly. So there is something at the end. So it's not exactly sure what he did at the very end, whether he intended that or just gave up doing it flat. But you can see all the other pianists, and then also here I add the audio recording of Hofmann. So you can see in his audio recording, he looks very similar to Paderewski, and with a kind of variation between note to note. He's also doing probably a very slight two-note rubato, so a little bit less than Kotlau does, at least in the opening. And then it kind of comes back at the beginning of the second phrase. And so even though we have people like Bauer and Hofmann in their audio recording and piano roll are trying to do pretty flat, but Hofmann in his duo art roll, he's exactly flat. And so like the secondary editor, not the pianist, would never do something this drastic. So it's clearly done by the pianist. And in our opinion, it's more, you could talk about this if you want, or you might keep talking. So it's more like he's searching for an aesthetic and trying to interact with technology. So very similar to Grace Chan's talk yesterday, kind of interacting of technology and human. So he's very much in this field, and he's like extremely enthusiastic about technology. But here, he basically creates a score out of his performance. So maybe he wants to hear, what does the score sound like, literally? Where pianists, they can't play exact, and even if they want to, if they're good training, they won't do it because they know how to kind of speak with the proper accent, you could say. So I won't go into too much of this, but there's lots of places where you can have error. So what happens here is on player pianos, the pianist has continuous time, and it's quantized into very specific time ranges. So for early duo arts, the timing is about 21 milliseconds between all these quantized timings. And then I've done previous experiments on my own just to look at the resolution of timing. So here's an example of an experiment where I just tap 100 beats per minute for 25 minutes. And then I look at the average tapping, and you can kind of see down on the bottom how that kind of histogram at the top matches to piano roll holes. So if you're tapping to a beat, your accuracy in general is about 1.5 holes. If you're doing faster things with fingers, it'll be much smaller timings. But this is kind of ideas of like limits you can have for different types of recording. So you can always go back and look at suspicious areas in piano rolls, say, is that, like, how possible is that? Another thing I've done test is like looking at what is the region where you can't tell the order of notes. So if you're within like 14 milliseconds, you have an accuracy of about 14 milliseconds. And if you have, or if you want 75% accuracy, so water fell on it about 2 weeks ago. That's why it's behaving like this now, but it must be humid in here. So usually I have to press escape and then it behaves. Here you're seeing it in. Okay, so basically I'll just summarize this is that there is a time resolution that you can hear the order of notes. And if you can't hear the order of notes, then it doesn't matter which one comes first. So that time range is about 20 milliseconds. And I'm trying to get the slideshow button. So there's also problems with dequantization. So once you have like this nice time sequence, when you render it in different ways, even putting it onto a piano roll is a dequantization process. So there's also skew and things like that involved. So there's always lots of little timing errors that happen in piano roll processing. And that's misbehaving again. So maybe I'll switch over to the PC. And then,
this one?
Yeah. So here's an example of dequantization. Yeah, okay. That's it. Oh, now it's not working. Now is it working? Okay. So here's an example of dequantizing piano rolls using scanning methods versus using the pneumatic reader of Peter Phillips. So this is a region in the first phrase where in the piano roll, it's intended to be flat, exactly, because if you reconstruct the matrix, it's flat. And so the blue line is scanning directly from the image with Michael Swanson's scanner. And then the dashed line is Peter Phillips' acoustic scanning. So Both of them are within this gray region, which is basically you can't really hear any changes of timing in that small time range. But the quantization error in Peter Phillips is a little bit larger than from the scan. So just to point out, so we're comparing different pianists, but mostly in this case, we're having to go back to the matrix. So it'd be a little bit hard to reconstruct a matrix from the Peter Phillips MIDI, but it's well within the range of not being audible, these small timing differences. And there's also problems with, especially early red rolls, is they don't have an evenly spaced matrix. So it doesn't really make sense to do these, or you can't really do these analyses on early red rolls. So the second phrase, not the second phrase, but where the A section comes back, there is variation in the timing, and you can see there's a significant retardando. So it looks like he only edited the timings of the very first 32 bars, well, excluding the introduction. So it's interesting, he only edited one piece and left the other more original, probably. But if we look at the left hand, it's the same thing. So the left hand in the first section, or first, the A1A, the 16-bar melody, it's very repetitive, except for the very, very ending, there's a break in the pattern. So there's no way a pianist could play this accurately for that long. In the second phrase, it's similar, like it doesn't look like he edited it. It's very precise in some places, but it has variations, so it's probably he left it in the original and didn't edit it. So he's probably maybe experimenting with flat versus natural performances to see how they interact. So another thing we looked at is we compare the piano roll timings with the audio recording timings. And so if you can see in Hofmann, you can see the very flat section at the beginning, whereas in his recording, he doesn't play fast. I mean, he doesn't play straight. He does have a slight accelerando. Another thing we noticed was the B sections in the audio recording were much faster than in the piano roll. So he played the piano roll slower in these sections, except in the B5 and B6 and coda section. So here's an example, just a comparison with Paderewski. So he's pretty much similar all the way across on his recording, both acoustically and with duo art. So it's maybe less likely that his role is ever processed significantly like this. So one thing we looked at was taking all of the quarter note timings and sorting them from lowest to highest for the different pianists. And one thing you notice is that for Hofmann, there's this unusual kind of bumps in the very bottom, which are probably statistically impossible because it's not really possible for a pianist to not have a very smooth progression between all of these notes because you'll have accelerandos and things. So what we did is we looked at where these things were happening, and I was basically interpreting that these are caused by Hofmann shortening notes. So he probably took the region of the purple stuff and kind of shortened it down to the 0.161 and the 0.164 timing. And if you look on the right, you can see where we sorted the timing. So you can see there's like coda, B6, coda, B6, and there'll probably also be some B5s in there. So basically he was shortening these regions. So when you look at these unusual regions where he is matching the piano roll to the audio, what he did is he sped up the piano roll to what he normally played in his performances. So even though this audio recording is from about 15 or 14 years later, he probably had the same style. And maybe he didn't like when you play fast on a piano roll, you can get more and more quantization between the notes, so you can hear it more obviously as an editable, like an incontinuity or like a discontinuity. And so he was probably maybe not wanting to play fast, but then he wanted to just like maybe speeding up these sections. So, and then almost the last thing we have is looking at the D2 section. And I won't play this right now, but he'll play it. It's on the MIDI. It's very even, but there's like one unusual thing which we think is a punch error. So maybe the paper slipped there because otherwise it's very flat. And he could have possibly performed this. It's theoretically possible, but probably he edited it as well. And the reason why I think it's theoretically possible is we also checked the audio. And so this is looking at sonic visualizer, extracting the timings for the individual notes, and then plotting the tempo curve here. And I have reference, like basically about 1 time difference quantization in the MIDI, or in the duo art, which is pretty much approximately the same as your timing resolution. So pretty much all of these are in the same kind of timing resolution. So if you listen to his audio, it does sound very even, except for note 21. And there's also, it was note 18 in the recording. So they are different notes. So it's not that he always did it the same way, but he does speed up, or in this particular case. And it looks like it's kind of maybe how he's landing on his thumb. So in both cases, it's a note that he's on his thumb coming down from black keys. And so it's probably just related to the mechanics of crossing over fingers. But in the piano roll, the nice thing is you can fix those and make it nice and even if you're not even in your performance. And then the last thing we'll talk about is, so we're only focusing on this roll, but he does it in other rolls as well. So Akiko does all the searching for this stuff, so she found this again. And so this is Mendelssohn's Opus 14, Rondo Capriccioso. And at the bottom is showing the tempo curve for the presto section of this piece. And if you look at the presto section, it has a very uniform repetitive rate. So it's basically a straight score is what he's doing in this section. So not only does he do it in the particular role of the waltz, but he's also done it in other cases. And this kind of goes back to Glenn's talk yesterday, one thing is as you go over in time, you get more and more editing of rolls. So probably in this case, like anything after 1920 or so is probably heavily edited, especially by Akiko. And also in this case, duo art is definitely doing it. So Akiko and I are interested in performance analysis. So not necessarily in piano roll rendition, but how the pianist plays. So you always wonder how much of this is edited. So can you say this is intention of the performer? So the dynamics are not the direct intention at all. So mostly is it the timings are. So we can look at the duo art of the Mendelssohn, and you can see it's nice and uniform. It looks like a perfect score almost. And the Red Welte from 6 years earlier has a lot of arpeggiation in it. And the note duration, the lengths of the notes are all different. So you pretty much say Red Welte is more authentic because either the company didn't allow the pianist to edit it, or they said, yeah, we don't want to edit it, or yeah, we just want to get it out fast, it sounds good, just put it out. So for performance analysis, Red Welte are I would think, more useful than other brands. So especially the earlier you go, the less editing there is. So that concludes our talk.
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Tonight we're going to be hearing Hofmann play the Chopin Concerto. And obviously what we've heard today suggests that the roll will be edited. However, as Glenn and I will absolutely confirm, there is an incredible amount of rubato, an incredible amount of rolling of notes, which suggests that at least this performance tonight is as played genuinely by Hofmann. But certainly what I see here with the evidence that we've seen, and I've seen this myself, duo art rolls by Hofmann were edited by him, and it's documented. But we're very fortunate, and we have an audio recording to prove it, that tonight's performance is indeed not edited.
Can you remind us of the year and the 25 and duo art also? Okay.
I'm sort of speaking on behalf of both Clive and me, myself. But the interesting thing here is, I don't really need a microphone, is that we seem to be seeing what we also read in Hofmann's books and other pianists of the time in wanting to sort of change the trajectory of performance style. So if he's editing his role in this way to make it look like the score, sound like the score, it would indicate this real trying to change the style to a more modern style, but not always. If we don't have that happening in the concerto, yeah, I've heard. I don't know. That just seems obvious.
Yeah. You want to comment on that? Well, yeah, he's in this role. He's definitely interacting with the technology. So he's not trying to make it even to cheat, maybe except in that D2 section. But in the beginning, yeah, there's no reason to flatten it because I can't really tell the difference. But he's kind of using technology to kind of influence his style.
Maybe I can add or?
Oh,
Yeah,
hello.
Yeah. Maybe and they have some other facts like. Hofmann was very interested in to discover some new things from same music, new aspects. And then in this case, some literature said they have kind of effect of clock, musical clock or something like this in the beginning, before this A1, A section comes. So maybe he tried to imitate a clock. Could be. that's my imagination. But.
Thank you. Thanks for a great lecture, and I've been coming to this now the second day, but I just want to understand with all that I've been watching, especially in editing, because we have the actual piano roll of the composer who did that. Is it because I respect? Is it because the arranger would like to just have his version of doing the editing on that? Because all the analysis we see that are done on the actual role. Why are we editing it? I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of work to do that editing, but what I'm trying to understand is I respect Hofmann wanting to do his own work, which is what he wants to see, which is understandable. The editors, are they arrangers that want to see another version of it? Because I think shouldn't we be leaving the actual role and just taking it as it is? I'm just a little bit confused understanding why we're tampering with the actual historical evidence we have.
Well, so the historical evidence we have is editors superimposing on the original performer. So the editors are from, in this case, the 1920s and 1930s. So we get a roll that has editor interpretations on there. So we're not, as modern people, adding interpretations.
I respect that, but why, again, are we editing something that's been sat in history?
Well, the people alive today are not doing any editing.
Oh, so it's on the, so it's like another version that we're getting.
Well, we're getting something that has been edited. And we have no choice because we can't get the unedited version.
So what we hear on the piano roll, it's not the actual version, yeah?
Well, it's not the acoustic one. So the timings are usually very accurate, but then usually they edit it for various reasons. The red rolls, the very early recordings, they don't. So also with acoustic recordings or audio recordings, before 1950 or 60, before they had magnetic tape, they didn't edit it because it was too difficult. But nowadays, every single note in an audio recording is edited when they put it on a CD.
But
yeah, so they try to add their kind of perfection to the music.
Yeah, but the question, first of all, every roll is edited by definition. It has to be edited to be created in some fashion, right? So there has to be some process involved, you might say. Yeah. Not just because of that, but just the nature of the medium, the nature of the process. This is sort of a theoretical fun question about the very nature of roles, you might say. But separate to that, I would just add that the editing that did take place within the companies that we know that we're talking about, I think that's an arena of research that is really interesting and ripe. Why they did it, how they did it, and they had different styles. We know all this, but I feel like there's still so much work to be done on this. We see evidence of it, and even when the performers were doing it, how they did it, and the mentality. And I have to say, it's a lot more than just fidelity. Undoubtedly, there were questions of dealing with the new technology. They were playing with the new potential of the technology. This is the first editable recording medium of any sort. So it had all sorts of interesting ramifications for exploring this new potential. So I think that's an interesting topic. I have to say, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. What the essence is? I mean, this is what we're teasing out in this very
with famous pianists, they were heavily involved in the editing process. So right. Paderewski, he was very technically able, so he probably did a lot of it himself. But other pianists like Paderewski or other famous pianists, so they would collaborate with the editor, say, I don't like this, maybe adjust the tempo here. But then you have less famous pianists, and they didn't have anything in the contract probably to protect them from the company's etiquette, like Hermann was showing.
Yes, wonderful. I think we should take this conversation. Tea is waiting for us, and we'll try. We have a packed day today. Thank you so much, Craig and Akiko. We have a packed schedule. Let's try to be back in 20 minutes if we can. So please keep in mind, 11:30, we're going to try to start on time because there's very little room. So rush back if you can. Thank you.